Hi, welcome to NWOBHM Guitar Tuition. Just doing a little video here. It's 40 years today since Maiden released their classic Killers album. So a little bit of history of this. I think my brother bought this the week it came out. A fantastic album sleeve for this. The first thing you noticed when you got the vinyl, the first Maiden album actually used some stock art by Derek Riggs of a kind of punk creature that he'd done. But they kind of adopted that as Eddie. The Phantom, as it were, and then that was kind of on the Killers album. It was obviously refined, and Derek Riggs kind of went into more detail to get it more like how the band wanted, I guess. And the Killers album's probably one of their greatest album covers, I think, of Iron Maiden, one of the great metal album covers. So that was the first thing about this album. He flipped over the back sleeve, he had really cool live shots of the band, and I remember he had nicknames, he had all the crew along the bottom, and the producer Martin Birch was Martin Headmaster Birch. So that was one of the fun things about this album. Why is this album a classic? I think it was in the shadow of Iron Maiden's debut for a bit of time. I think the principal reason was Maiden's debut made such a big impact. They made number 4 on the UK chart, spearheaded NWOBHM as one of the key releases that year, along with Saxon's Wheels of Steel and Old Guard releases like Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath, and of course Judas Priest, British Steel, perhaps the defining metal album of 1980. The Iron Maiden debut had pretty bad production, but it's littered, but it's got great songs in it. Phantom of the Opera, Running Through Transylvania, Prowler, Remember Tomorrow, there you go, 5 off the bat, Iron Maiden. Not the best track, but a real anthem for the band. And Strange World, a really cool deep cut. Maybe Charlotte the Harlot, Letting It Down. So Killers came out the year after. The sort of initial buzz of 1980 was over for some bands. So what you often find in 1981, some of the chart placings for bands releasing albums from this genre are lower than the year before. And maybe some people have dropped off, they've kind of followed the fad of metal and are like, oh, maybe it's not for me. Whereas other people stuck with it and grabbed this record. So the first thing about this album is the introduction of Martin Birch. They had a guy called, I think, Will Malone on the first album. You know, Martin Birch, proper heavy metal producer, great track record with Black Sabbath, Rainbow, stuff like that. Later, do Michael Schenker as well, Deep Purple, of course. So what he does is he comes in and just basically ballses up the sound. The bass is a lot bigger, the guitars are tighter, better played. He gets much more punch on Clive Burr's drums, quite toppy, tinny, especially the tom sound on the debut album. I'm not sure how much more he gets out of Paul Di'Anno, and I think this might sort of lead to, part of Paul Di'Anno's demise. Principally was alcohol and cocaine use in Maiden, but there's not a massive change in the Di'Anno on this, and we'll come to like one artifact from it as well regarding that. Basically the band probably knocked this out after doing all their UK and European touring. Looking Here is recorded November 1980, into January, is out on February the 2nd, so they just blasted it out. Some of the tracks on this, Another Life, Murders in the Rue Morgan, Drifter, were actually tracks you can hear and old bootlegs and things like that before this. So Steve Harris obviously had some songs in the gas tank. So I think it's a little more of a broad listen than Maiden's debut album. So let's just have a little look at it. This is like, there's that great album cover, so it's back to front, but it's just so perfectly done. Absolutely brilliant. So the first track opens an instrumental, The Ides of March. So this is something that metal bands will copy. I've done it. Obviously Judas Priest did it the next year with Scream for Vengeance. So Ides of March is a really cool instrumental. In actual fact, it's credited to 4 members of Samson. I don't know how it's turned out, how Steve Harris has ended up recording it. I was just looking at the notes here, and the track's called Thunderburst. But anyway, Ides of March, really cool opening with harmony guitar. Should also mention on this, the first lead break is, I do believe it's Adrian Smith, so this is the beginning of the first classic Maiden lineup. No disrespect to Dennis Stratton, he's a really good player, but Adrian Smith coming in, knocks stuffs up a notch, and this is, like I said, the first classic lineup. Then you get the kind of second evolution of that with Bruce, and then finally with Nico coming in. But a really cool track, 2 cool lead breaks, and dies down on a really nice chord, and then it goes into a Rothschild Basically all-time classic Maiden track, great groove. What you notice on this is like how much more punch there is on Steve Harris's bass. So he's got the classic clanking Harry sound, which has always been the predominant instrument in Maiden, but it's sitting better with Clive Burr's drums. They're sounding better, and Eddie Smith coming in's just tightened everything up, and this band's really firing on all six. I think on this album the one thing is the tempos are really high. It's a high tempo, high energy album. Di'Anno's vocals, I was thinking about this before and I was listening through the album. Where do you place Paul Di'Anno in the lineage of sort of style of metal singing? And I think there's a few people spring to mind. He's got like this kind of scream thing he does occasionally, but it's not piercing like Rob Halford. It's kind of soft and maybe sort of David Byron-ish. I don't know if that was an influence. He's got a gruff element to his voice, which would mean maybe Dan McCafferty and Nazareth possibly, and also Bon Scott. And then there's also a little kind of soulful element. I don't know whether he's like Coverdale or Rogers when he's younger. You know, an unusual metal singer, not the typical metal singer. And again, Maiden went for something more classic with Bruce. But he gives a really good performance on this album. I've always liked his voice. It just always sounded like early Maiden to me. So Rothschild is cool. It's got that kind of, although it doesn't change tempo, it changes groove in the middle, and that's a hallmark of the band. And in the middle of this track, I'll actually have a riff that'll kind of appear later in a track called Innocent Exile. I think what's interesting in Rothschild, you know, there's in that middle riff, there's a little bluesy element, and some of the riffs have that sort of pentatonic bluesy element to them, and they'll kind of discard that as they go along more, and they go more epic. And I think the difference is Maiden will become kind of a power metal band as they go into the Bruce era. In this era, less so. Next track up was like Murders in the Rue Morgue, and this is one of the tracks that they had prior to the Iron Maiden debut album. Again, I think this is the track where it's got a lot of high energy and where they get the kind of, are they influenced by punk tag, because it's got that kind of really pumping tempo. Steve Harris has always gone, you know, we weren't influenced by punk, we hated it. And yeah, my feeling is, if you're looking for the punk influence on Maiden, I think it's more Steve Harris is writing these songs and creating this band at a time when punk comes to the fore. So just as he's getting Maiden going, punk comes along late 76 into 77, 78. And that must be really annoying if you're a metal musician. The same thing, you know, if you're a metal musician and grunge and the Seattle sound comes along in a way. And I think in a way his sort of aggression and high tempo and angry style, it was a response to that. So in that respect, I think they were influenced by punk in that Steve Harris is going, fuck you, punk. And in that respect, he's kind of taken a bit of the attitude there. So that's sort of my take on that. Murders in the Rue Morgue's a great track, really, really catchy. Again, Steve Harris taking, you know, horror literature. You had Phantom of the Opera. I'm guessing Murders in the Rue Morgue, is that Edgar Allan Poe? Not sure. Anyway, you know, this is something he'll do, is taking song titles from like the Ides of March as well, from literature and films and getting lyrical concepts. The next track's the one I just can't always get away with, Another Life. Again, this is another one from before the Iron Maiden album. I think I've heard this on kind of bootlegs or there's footage of them from the Ruskin Arms or something. It's kind of catchy. It just doesn't quite do it for me. It's got a weird sort of kind of bluesy lick opening it, which is quite unusual for Maiden. It's got a crazy tempo change in the middle. Then track number 5 is Genghis Khan. So this is their third full-on instrumental, the second one on the album, obviously on the main album, Transylvania. This is great. It's got a really cool groove. Again, it goes into a kind of high tempo change and then totally flips into a kind of slow gallop like the middle of Phantom of the Opera. There's some really cool soloing on it, harmony. I think Clive Burr's drums are great on this. So there's always that argument with Clive Burr, who's the best main drummer. I'm one of these people, I prefer Clive Burr's feel, and I know a lot of musicians and drummers who prefer that. I think the general opinion is Nico's probably technically better, particularly with that single kick drum technique. I just always like the sound of Clive Burr. And it's weird how he went into Number of the Beast, and you know they're about to go over to the next level in the UK and about to go to the next level in America, but then he, you know, because of drinking and stuff, he gets moved sideways, but that's it. Steve Harris ran a tight ship. And then the last track on side one's Innocent Exile, which is a really interesting track. It's kind of got, again, I was telling you about that Rothschild sort of pentatonically bluesy riff. Again, I quite like the groove on this, something different from Maiden. Like Di'Anno's vocals, again, it's got a kind of up-tempo bit in the middle of time change, which goes on to the end, and I think this one starts with a really cool Steve Harris bass intro, so it's quite a bit of distortion on the bass, almost geezer-ish, and then there's a nice harmony line comes over the top. So it's been side one's interesting. It's not, if you imagine side one in the first Iron Maiden album, you've got Prowler, Running Free, Transylvania, Phantom of the Opera. It's like, whoa, four of the greatest Maiden tracks ever. It's kind of got a different flow to it. But like I say, it benefits from the introduction of Adrian Smith and the much better production. What I would say at this point is one thing I noticed when I was listening through, there's quite a lot of reverb on Paul Di'Anno's voice, and he's sunk slightly in the mix. And my feeling is, did Martin Birch sort of think, yeah, this guy's good, but he's not great? And what sometimes producers do and people mixing, they'll look for the stronger elements, and he's pushed the drums and the bass and the guitars. You've got to remember, Martin Birch has worked with Ian Gillan, he's worked with Coverdale, and he's worked with Ronnie James Dio. So he's worked with like three of the greatest singers ever in the genre. I've probably missed, there's maybe someone else he's worked with up to there as well. Later on, obviously, he worked with Graham Bonnet as well. And Paul Di'Anno's got, he's a really good singer, I realise his voice, but he's not at that level. And I suspect possibly Birch, communicated this maybe to Harris, or maybe when they were discussing getting a singer, I reckon they would have spoken to the headmaster, as it were. Of course, later on, he would sign an exclusive contract with Maiden that would mean he would only produce them, and he'd retire quite early after the Seventh Son album, I think. So that's maybe my feeling with that. Maybe Martin Birch was like, yeah, this guy's good, but I've worked with a gold standard, and he's kind of, slightly tarnished gold standard. Side two opens with one of my favourite Maiden tracks. I used to be in a band called Vendetta, and we covered this. Maybe I'll put the link at the bottom of this clip. But it's a great track. It's got some really cool screams by Di'Anno. I think it's probably the album's best track or second best track. It's in full flow on this. If you watch the Live at the Rainbow video from late 1980, they actually play this track, but the lyrics aren't finished, and I can't remember what Di'Anno does. Maybe he just kind of makes them up or something like that. The other thing, this track's 4:58. All the tracks in this album, like side one, I'm just looking there on the screen. Every track, Rothschild's one of their few tracks under 3 minutes. Mirrors and Room Mog's just over 4. The other ones are under 4 minutes. This one's just under 5. These are shorter, punchy tracks. This album's only 38 minutes long. Iron Maiden would never make a shorter album like that again, really. The first album's 36 minutes. Once they went into these longer, more progressive things. I think the next track is a bit of a precursor to that, although it's unlike any tracks it did, and this may be my favourite track on the album. It's one of my all-time favourite Maiden tracks, and this is Prodigal Son. So this is maybe a bit Harry's Tull influence coming out. It's got lovely acoustic chords, double tracked, I think. Maybe some 12-string in there, not sure. The bass and drums on this just sound great with the interplay on the guitar. First lead break's fantastic by Adrian, showing off his quality of his vibrato. And that's something you should say about Adrian Smith. I mean, he's not fully, his force isn't fully felt on this album. He's come in sometime in late 80, I think. So, he'd probably start contributing later on with his writing and that, which is a big part of Maiden's rise, because he always chips in 2 or 3 great songs on an album. But yeah, this is a great track. I like Di'Anno's vocals on this. Lyrics are really cool. Again, I'm saying sort of it's kind of a bit more stretched out, a little more proggy. But in a way it's proggy in a way that they, Rime of the Ancient Mariner isn't, that's kind of more power metal proggy, I guess. But it's a great sounding track. I think it's one of the best produced tracks on the album. The instrumental balance on this is really good, the tom sound, the snare. And the band sounds really in sync, and again, that's Martin Birch's skill, is he gets a band sounding like the band it is and just gets it down on tape. Then your next track, sorry, I'll look there, 'cause the Principle Purgatory. Again, this is an up-tempo, really fast track with top twin guitars. Really cool tune. And then it finishes with Drifter, which I quite like. I'm not as much into this. I'm kind of with Another Life on this. It's kind of a bit jolly. I think, again, this is from the time before the first Iron Maiden albums. You got like Iron Maiden, Another Life, and Murders in the Rue Morgue. I guess the Ides of March really being pulled from the archives to a certain extent. One of the Martin album out of 10, I mean, it is a classic. My feeling is there's a couple of tracks I'm not as into as much, would make it an 8, but it's probably an 8.5. I still think the first Iron Maiden albums got kind of those killer songs. I just think this has got a nice kind of shape to it, and production, the album cover, that whole time, and it is many people's favourite Maiden album, and it's undoubtedly a classic of NWOBHM. For me, the end of 1981, the NWOBHM starts to kind of finish properly. A lot of people wouldn't agree with this. There's bands like we're NWOBHM and they started in 1983, but I have a Metal for Mothers rule. If you get on Metal for Mothers Volume 2, if you take that as a cut-off point, and actually kind of 79 to 81, all those bands, and of which Maiden and Saxon were the leaders, Def Leppard as well, before they stopped being metal. So I hope you enjoyed this. Killer's 40 years old. Amazing. There'll be more of these coming as we go through the years. Cheers, thanks very much.